My mother-in-law entered my room a week before the wedding and tried to ruin my wedding dress to teach me a lesson. However, she didn't know that everything was being recorded. Her reaction when the video was played in front of 200 guests at the wedding was unforgettable. I, 30, female, got engaged to my boyfriend, 26, male, of 3 years, about 6 months back. We've been living together for 2 years, and it just felt like the time was right, so I said yes. My fiancé is the sole heir to his father's company. They are the owners of a really reputable shipping company and are loaded, which I didn't even find out about until after. I've been seeing my fiancé for a month already. I'm mentioning this so that you guys know I was never in this for the money at all. And I'm certainly not a gold digger. As a matter of fact, I myself make a decent living as a flight attendant. I met my fiancé at a gig, where he asked me out as soon as I served him his coffee. And even though I was hesitant to say yes because he looked significantly younger than me, I ended up agreeing to a date because of his insistence. And I've never regretted it either. We pretty much have a fairy tale romance. But the only thing that's been in our way ever since the first year of our relationship has been my mother-in-law. Now, you guys may have heard of mother-in-laws who dislike their daughters-in-law, but that's not the case here. No, it's much worse, because unlike others, my mother-in-law absolutely loathes me. She can't stand the sight of me and has made it abundantly clear right from the first time that my fiancé brought me home to meet his family. 4 months into our relationship, she pulled me aside after dinner and told me to break up with him or she'd make my life no less than a nightmare. I was obviously shocked that she'd spoken to me this way, since she'd been really sweet to me throughout dinner. But obviously that was just an act for my fiancé. She called me a glorified maid and said that she wasn't going to let some gold digger flight attendant steal her son away from her when he could do so much better. Not only that, she also hated the fact that I was older than him and told me to go find someone my age instead. I felt humiliated and had half a mind to tell my fiancé about what had happened, but decided against it because I wanted to show my mother-in-law that I wasn't the weak and flimsy woman she expected me to be. And I wasn't intimidated in the slightest. Throughout the years, she's done her best to make me feel uncomfortable and put me down whenever she finds the chance at family events and holidays, but I've never let it get to me. And here we are, finally getting married. I really thought that she'd accept defeat this time and let things go gracefully, but I was wrong. As soon as she was told the news of our engagement, she tried to convince my fiancé to force me to quit my job. She told him that as an air hostess, I'd never have enough time to spend at home with him, and that would create problems in our marriage. I guess she'd expected me to say no to that, and that would inevitably lead to a fight between me and my fiancé. But little did she know, I'd already applied to switch to a desk job a couple of weeks before the engagement. I'd already been planning on making the switch regardless of marriage, so that wasn't going to be an issue at all. And of course, that was a huge disappointment to her, since we didn't have a massive fight like she'd wanted us to. So next, she started trying to take over control of the wedding and decided to call all my ideas tacky and said that I had bad taste, even though nobody else thought so. Luckily, even that was nipped in the bud by my fiancé, who told us straight away that the only thing she had any say in was the guests we invited, since they had a lot of family friends. To invite and only his mother could keep track of it, otherwise, whatever I said would be the last word. And if she had any opinions on it, then she could simply keep it to herself. That rubbed her the wrong way as well. But after that, she started staying away from me and kept to herself most of the time. I could tell she wasn't happy about it, but now that my fiancé had made it clear that he wouldn't tolerate any disrespect towards me, there wasn't much that she could do anyway. So anyway, a week before my wedding, I brought home my wedding dress to try on the next day. My friend had her own label, so needless to say, she was my designer, and I was extremely pleased with the results. It had been months of fittings and alterations, and I couldn't believe that I finally got to try it on. It was the weekend and my husband wasn't home that day either since he had work. So I decided to try it on and take a video of me twirling in my dress just so that I could send it to my bridesmaids. My mother-in-law had been sitting in the living room since the morning that day because she'd come over to meet my fiancé and talk to him about the guest list. So she'd refused to leave and said that she'd wait for him to come back home. The only time I came out of my room was to bring my dress into my bedroom since I kept it in my husband's study earlier, but I didn't trust my mother-in-law to leave it be and that was my first mistake. I did notice her ogling the bag and I guess she could tell by the shape of what was in it. I didn't care much about it though and just let her sit out there while I went back to my bedroom to try it on. But before I got into the dress, it was up to me to take a long shower and get all nice and clean before I actually tried my dress on. We have an attached bathroom, so I must have been in the shower for around half an hour before I came back out. While I was in there, I did hear some sounds outside but didn't think much of it. I regretted it as soon as I came out and saw that my dress had been taken out of its cover and snipped in odd but noticeable places, and there were multiple red stains over it. I must not have locked the door to my bedroom properly because I was in a hurry and my mother-in-law had found it easy to force it open. I obviously knew that this had my mother-in-law written all over it and I rushed out to confront her because I really was at my limit. But she'd already left by then. She'd even left an open bottle of red wine and a pair of scissors on the coffee table, probably to taunt me. I knew she'd done this to ruin my day and force me to wear something off the rack at the very last minute, because obviously she's messed my dress up pretty badly and was trying to push me into a corner by ruining all that I planned for myself. This was her last attempt at ruining my wedding, since she couldn't ruin my relationship with her son. I think I must have sat and cried on the couch for 10 minutes before I remembered that I'd left my phone in the bedroom. I ran back to my room, and to my immense relief, I'd been careless enough to leave it on the dresser while it was still recording. For the first time in my life, I was thankful that I'd forgotten about my phone and left it recording. It had captured every single thing that my mother-in-law had done, and I now had video proof of her trying to sabotage my wedding. Now I could have used it then and there and sent it to my fiancé to get her uninvited from the wedding and probably have her cut off from us for the rest of our lives. But I decided to go a step further and get back at her for everything that she'd put me through. All these years, I put up with enough without a word, simply because I was determined to stay with my fiancé. It wasn't even a war against her, at least on my end. I just didn't want to stir up drama, and I knew that she'd go out of her way to be cruel just to incite a reaction from me. So I stayed quiet, even in the face of insane cruelty and disrespect, for the sake of my own sanity and my relationship. But I had enough. I thought that responding negatively to her behavior would mean that she'd win. But this time she truly outdone herself. If her reaction was what she wanted, then that was exactly what I was going to give her. I was very careful to save the video and even saved it to my laptop just in case. I dried my tears and sent my dress back to my friend, requesting her to fix all the things that my mother-in-law had done to her. She was the only person apart from me who was aware of the situation, and I can't put into words how thankful I am for her kindness and support. She told me she'd get it done before my wedding day and I didn't need to worry about a thing, which was just so sweet. The next few days after that, my mother-in-law visited regularly under the pretext of speaking to my fiancé, and I was as nice to her as I could be. Even she seemed to be taken aback by my behavior, since she'd obviously expected me to be majorly pissed off about what she'd done. But I merely pretended that nothing had happened at all, and that did a pretty good job of misleading her into believing that I'd looked past the incident with the wedding dress. So she started getting even more smug and would make remarks about how she couldn't wait for the day of my wedding to see me all in white. She had no idea what I had up my sleeve, so I kept my mouth shut and only smiled whenever she passed these comments. I told my friend to bring the dress with her only on the morning of my wedding, because I didn't want to risk any more such incidents. 3 days before my wedding, my friend showed me on a video call how she cleaned up all the stains and she'd sewn it all back together so it looked as good as new. I guess my mother-in-law had underestimated how amazing my friends were and how she'd be willing to put all her work aside just for my sake. So 2 days back, on the day of my wedding, when I walked down the aisle wearing the very dress that my mother-in-law had supposedly ruined, she was pretty much dumbstruck, to say the least. I did manage to get a glimpse of her expression when she saw me wearing my dress, and it was one that clearly said, "Oh crap." So I was really pleased with that. I managed to put everything related to my mother-in-law out of my head for the next few minutes while the vows were exchanged, and it was all just like how I'd imagined it. I was incredibly happy that despite her many attempts, she failed yet again to do anything that would ruin my day. I had the ceremony that I'd always dreamt of, and I was genuinely thrilled. After the ceremony, it was time for the wedding speeches, and I decided to save the best for the last. So everyone went up and said beautiful things about me and my husband, and I was truly moved by it all. But I also kept my head clear because I knew what I was about to do was going to shock people, to say the least. Finally, at the very end, I took out the mic for my maid of honor and started off by thanking everyone for attending. There were around 200 people in attendance, most of whom were my husband's guests. His parents, friends, and their families were all there, and so were most of his families, so there really was no better opportunity for me to reveal to them what kind of person my mother-in-law was. I said a couple of sweet things about my relationship with my fiancé and kept it appropriately cute. But then after I'd done all of that, I said that I also had something really important that I needed people to know. I told them about how there was only one major obstacle that stood in my way throughout the course of our relationship, and that obstacle was present at the wedding as well. That led to a lot of confused looks and whispering, and that was quite natural. My husband's family and friends also looked quite shocked because they had no idea what was coming. I said that they could see for themselves what obstacle I was referring to, and on cue the clip of my mother-in-law ruining my wedding dress began to play. Initially, nobody seemed to understand what was happening, but then as my mother-in-law entered the frame, a look of understanding appeared on people's faces, and there were quite a few audible guests from the guests while they watched my mother-in-law viciously tear away at the fabric and then splash red wine on several spots on purpose. She then left hurriedly and that's where the clip cut off. That was followed by probably the loudest silence I'd ever heard in my entire life, until 2 minutes later, my mother-in-law got up all red in the face. She then proceeded to charge at me like an angry bull, but luckily my husband caught her before she could come close to me and dragged her away while she screamed all sorts of profanity at me and accused me of trying to ruin her reputation in front of her family and friends. I was pleased with her reaction and even more pleased when I realized that the people present looked scandalous, since it meant that they'd definitely not forget about this wedding and what they witnessed my mother-in-law doing for a long time to come. We opened up the bar and served people the food while I waited for my husband to come back. Honestly, I didn't even feel bad about making all the other guests feel awkward because these were mostly pretentious, elitist, upper-class rich socialites who were only here to judge me since I didn't belong to their glamorous world and was a self-made woman with a job. After that whole fiasco, my parents came up to me. They seemed really annoyed with me. They'd been on edge ever since I told them I was dating someone who was that rich, because obviously they found all this wealth and luxury daunting and wanted me to try and blend in. But I never followed their advice. This time I'd acted really badly in their opinion, and while they did agree that my mother-in-law was a psycho, they also felt that I could have waited to confront or humiliate her instead of airing our dirty linen in public. I got into a bit of an argument with them over it, but they refused to understand why I had done what I'd done and ended up finishing up their lunch as fast as they could and leaving without even a goodbye, which was hurtful. 15 minutes after that, my husband came back and informed me that he'd driven his mother back to the hotel and asked to have a word with me in person. Since I'd been sitting with my friends while they told me that what I'd done was gutsy, but could also have adverse effects on my relationship. So I was scared out of my wits while I followed my husband to a corner of the venue where nobody would disturb us or be able to hear us. I was fully convinced that he'd break up with me then and because of how I'd made a fool out of him and his family. I even began to apologize for whatever I'd done as soon as he stopped walking. But to my surprise, he told me that he was the one who needed to apologize. He said that on the drive back to the hotel, his mother said a lot of awful things about me that no woman should say about another woman, and that made him realize that his mother had just always hated me. But he failed to see the signs. He added that even though he did think that what I'd done was extreme, it was probably because I'd stayed silent for so long that I couldn't just hold back anymore. He didn't know if what I'd done was right or wrong, but he knew that he didn't have an issue with it and said that he'd be cutting his mother out of his life now. I was taken aback to hear that, since I was sure that he dumped me then. But yeah, that was that. And it was a solemn affair after that, since all the guests were rushing to leave to avoid any awkwardness. Things have been normal between me and my husband. But my parents are refusing to speak to me until I apologize to my mother-in-law. They believe that I should have handled it better. And, yeah, I do think I could have, but I didn't do so because of how angry I was. So here's the $1 million question, Idaho for showing all the guests at my wedding how my mother-in-law had tried to ruin my dress. For those asking, yes. My mother-in-law no longer is in contact with me or my husband. At least not personally, but, yeah, in a professional capacity. My husband still has to speak to her since she's a major stakeholder in the company, but she's not attending any dinners we host anytime. They had a huge fight a day after our wedding about how she'd been treating me all these years, and my husband chose to cut her off. So that was that. The day after our wedding, she showed up at our house and was shocked that my husband hadn't packed up his stuff to leave yet, because she just assumed that after all that had happened the day before, my husband would leave me. She even refused to set foot in our home because of the filth inside it, namely me. But I was above such petty comments now and chose to ignore her entirely while sitting on the couch with my headphones on. Of course, nothing was playing, but it helped to piss her off. Even more lol, when my husband told her that he had no intention of leaving and he was going to stay with me no matter what happened, she totally lost it. My husband hadn't said anything in the car the day before while driving her back to her hotel when she'd been ranting about me, so she assumed that he agreed with her. So this was quite the rude awakening for her. She began to scream at my husband and once again went on a tirade against me. She attacked my lowly profession as a flight attendant and even said that I wasn't fit to marry into a family like theirs given my background. But my husband stood his ground and fought right back this time. Eventually, he just slammed the door in her face. And I think that must have been the last straw for her as well. She hasn't tried anything funny, and neither has she called or texted yet, so it's been suspiciously quiet on her end. But I think she's realized that at this point, whatever she does will only make it all the worse for her. It's been 4 days since the whole wedding fiasco, and most of my husband's family has decided to cut ties with his mother. So that's nice. My friends and cousins are already making jokes about how iconic this was, but my parents are still not talking to me. They want me to apologize on a public platform. For what? I did, and? Well, that's not happening for sure. I'm planning on visiting them next evening to clear the air in person, and I hope it goes well. Update 2. So my husband and I just came back home from my visit to my parents, and I guess things are looking up now. They weren't very receptive in the beginning, but then my husband stepped in and explained to them that he didn't mind what I'd done, and frankly, neither did anyone else. It wasn't my fault that his mother had pushed me to this extent that I felt obliged to expose her and humiliate her in public this way. I've been a bigger person long enough, and things had to change. Which is why I did what I did. Coming from my husband, I guess my parents realized that this wasn't something that reflected badly on me, but instead just showed people how awful my mother-in-law was.